These photos you're seeing right now shows how Stalingrad was in the year 1943. Just imagine what devastating act or battle could have caused Stalingrad to almost be in ruins. As you may have guessed, this documentary will be exploring the significance of the Battle of Stalingrad and to the extent this event was a turning point. But firstly, what was the Battle of Stalingrad and why did it begin? The Battle of Stalingrad was a brutal military campaign between the Russian forces and those of Nazi Germany and the Axis powers during World War II. The battle is infamous as one of the largest, longest, and bloodiest engagements in modern warfare. From August 1942 through to February 1943, more than 2 million troops fought in close quarters, and nearly 2 million people were killed or injured in the fighting. But by the end of the Battle of Stalingrad, the battle ultimately turned the tide of World War II in favor of the Allied forces and diminished any chance of Germany winning the war. The fact that the city bore the name of Hitler's nemesis, Joseph Stalin, would make the capture of Stalingrad ideological and a propaganda coup if it were to be captured, which is one of the reasons why Hitler ordered for its capture. To Russia, Stalingrad was a hub for communications and manufacturing, which is why it was pivotal that the Red Army had to safeguard it and ensure it does not get captured by Germany. Joseph Stalin then motivated his troops to fight for Stalingrad, inducing the resolute Russians to become determined to never let the city fall, despite their lack of men and equipment. What ensued was one of the most brutal of World War II battles, where the Russians ended up being successful after months of fierce hardship and determination, and Germany ended up experiencing an embarrassing defeat, leading up to be a major turning point in the course of the war. I believe the Battle of Stalingrad, to a large extent, is the turning point of World War II in Europe for numerous reasons. The reason why Stalingrad was so significant and was a turning point in World War II is that it was the first major defeat dealt to the Germans in wars on land. Up until that point, Germany had dominated every battle, despite having inferior equipment at times, against both England and Russia. With the loss at Stalingrad, Germany lost a huge amount of equipment, material, and most importantly, experienced troops. With the loss of one Polish and the Sixth Army, as well as the German Army Group South, which lost the majority of its planes, artillery, and tanks, Germany was dealt with a crisis. Most historians also support this view. For instance, British historian Anthony Beevor argues that the reason Stalingrad was a turning point is that by choosing to extend the Battle of Stalingrad and not giving up, Germany was doing nothing but killing their hopes of victory in the battle and in World War II as every hour passed. This led to immense loss of life, morale, and lack of equipment as the Germans had to continue to suffer the harsh freezing conditions of Russia without any food or additional warm attire, while the Russians were fully equipped and accustomed to the conditions. Because of that, there was no chance that the Germans could pull out this victory. Frederick Paulus, who was the commanding general of the Sixth Army at Stalingrad, requested Hitler to allow him to surrender to save his troops from death. However, Hitler urged them to continue and fight till the last man, or commit suicide, which proved to be a major mistake as nearly the whole army got captured or died due to starvation, the cold, or some sort of disease. Troops without ammunition or food, effective command no longer possible, 18,000 rounded without any supplies or dressings or drugs. Further defense senseless, collapse inevitable, army requests immediate permission to surrender in order to save lives of remaining troops. This is an English translated radio message from Friedrich Paulus to Adolf Hitler on 24 January 1943, and is evidence of him requesting Hitler to let them surrender. The primary source currently being shown essentially demonstrates how the Soviet soldiers took an offensive approach against the Germans when the Germans were weak due to the cold and lack of resources. This photograph is reliable as it was taken by Georgi Zelmer, who during the Second World War worked for Izvestia and took photos of many places, including the Battle of Stalingrad. The primary source is indeed very useful as it gives us an indication of how harsh the battle was at that time, as Stalingrad looks like it is in ruins and almost destroyed due to the fierce warfare, and it also demonstrates the manner in which the soldiers took their offensive approach. The prominent British historian Max Hastings also supports Beevor's view and states, once the Germans have been thrown back from Stalingrad, once they've lost that battle, the war was never the same again, demonstrating how significant this battle was for the course of the war and how the outcome of this battle ultimately changed how the rest of World War II was going to play out in the Eastern Front. As by the end of the battle, everyone thought that Germany would never be in a position to seriously threaten the Soviet state. Beaver believes that the Battle of Stalingrad was also the psychological turning point of the war. He believes it became quite clear both to the Red Army and also to the German army that from now on, because of Germany's crisis, there would now be a movement of hardship and terror towards the west, and eventually Berlin would have to suffer the same fate as Stalingrad. The German army's defeat in the Battle of Stalingrad also ultimately turned the tide towards the Allied forces, which included Britain, France, Russia, and the United States. On the contrary, while historians like Beefer and Hastings support my view that the Battle of Stalingrad was a major turning point of World War II, some historians have different views. For instance, the veteran historian Dennis Showalter believes that the Battle of Kursk should be seen as the key turning point of the war, even more important than Stalingrad due to its long-term implications. He argues that after Germany's defeat at Kursk, the Germans never again looked like they might win the war in the Eastern Front. The statistics relating to the Battle of Kursk, the battle between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia in July 1943, had almost 3 million men, a full 8,000 tanks, and nearly 5,000 warplanes used, which have broken all records for both the costliest single day of aerial warfare and the largest tank battle in the history of mankind. If the Germans had defeated the Russian army, they would have possibly turned the tide of World War II in their favor. However, due to their defeat in the Battle of Kursk, Showalter believes this battle essentially confirmed that Germany would never be able to pose any threat to the Allied forces. On the other hand, there were also some positive unintended effects of the war, which was the inclusion of women in the Russian army, of which many served as snipers in Vasily Sniper School and had many confirmed kills in the army. Women joining the Russian army were part of Stalin's attempt to get as many bodies on the front line as possible, which proved very beneficial to the Russians for the rest of the war. In the war, women predominantly served as frontline troops, translators, nurses, or snipers. However, the battle also had many consequences for the German military. At Stalingrad, the German Sixth Army surrendered, and with it, 90,000 men were sent to prison and labor camps. The Germans would also never get a chance to launch an offensive in Russia, as from this point forward, they were running backwards. Russia, meanwhile, began making huge gains after the victory in Stalingrad. They moved further west, capturing scores of cities and towns. The morale of the Russian army also skyrocketed, as they had never seen the Germans retreat until now, as stated earlier. The photograph currently being shown was taken at the time of the Russian army's victory when the whole German army surrendered and was being taken captive. The photograph shows a member of Russia's army celebrating by waving around the red flag in honor of Russia's victory. This photograph is reliable as it was taken by a World War II photographer, Georgi Zelma, who took photos of the Battle of Stalingrad as stated earlier. And this is also useful because in a way it demonstrates the sheer determination and hardship the Russians showed during the battle against Germany, and in the end celebrated their victory patriotically by waving the red flag around. The above photo currently being shown is reliable as it was also taken by Georgi Zelma and is very useful as it gives us evidence of German soldiers surrendering and being captured by the Russians. As the above photo supports the statistics that showed 91,000 Germans were taken prisoner and a complete army group was lost at Stalingrad, telling us how much with such a massive loss of manpower and equipment, the Germans simply did not have enough manpower to cope with the Russian advance to Germany in the near future, which is why it was very useful. Therefore, in the end, I believe the Battle of Stalingrad was significant as it marked a major turning point in the course of World War II due to the effects it had on both Germany and Russia, and definitely paved the path towards victory for the Allied forces of Russia, Britain, France, and the United States.